Welcome to Biz Wire. I'm Joseph Nordstrom in Beijing. The expansion in credit in China is getting increasingly complicated. The central government in Beijing has been trying to reduce debt financing at the local level, which has resulted in officials finding new ways to pay for new projects. Instead of continuing to rely just on the rolling over of bank loans coming due, Beijing is backing alternative plans to clean up and collect on bad debt. As Dinny McMahon writes in the Wall Street Journal, write-offs have multiplied in recent months. Over-the-counter asset exchanges have sprung up as a way for banks to find buyers for collateral seized from defaulting borrowers and for bad loans they want to spin off. Instead of the 4 national asset management companies used in the past, provinces have started setting up their own bad banks. These are state-owned institutions that can take over non-performing loans that threaten banks' ability to continue lending. Write-offs aren't ideal as they take away funds set aside to cover loan losses and reduce banks' capital base. McMahon says to avoid a costly bailout in the future, the government is pushing banks to clean up their balance sheet before it's too late. He says Beijing is giving them new tools to do so. This help is coming in the form of exchanges to sell bad assets, the provincial-level bad banks that will take on non-performing loans, and also allowing banks to raise fresh capital using hybrid securities, which he describes as complex products that combine aspects of debt and equity. Because of Beijing's push to reduce debt, bank loans have become a less important funding source for local governments. In fact, McMahon says it's becoming much more difficult to identify what qualifies as local government debt and who is ultimately responsible for the rapidly rising amounts of debt in China's economy. McMahon says bank loans accounted for 79% of all local government debt at the end of 2010, but only 23% of the $1.2 trillion of new debt added in the past 3 years. Since spending and credit expanded substantially in that period, this shows how much more complicated it is to follow how officials at the county, city, and township levels are funding projects. McMahon states that instead of using local government financing vehicles, officials turn to shadow banking to, quote, skirt limits on borrowing directly from banks. McMahon also says that local governments push developers and contractors to get their own financing. But he says the biggest change was that state-owned enterprises took on much more responsibility for funding their expansion than in the past. Since SOEs could no longer rely on local governments, they took on 43.7% of new debt issued in the past 3 years. China's National Audit Office told the Wall Street Journal that the rise of SOEs as a funding channel is directly linked with the shift by local governments moving from explicitly guaranteeing debt to extending implied guarantees. McMahon says this means that SOEs raise debt on local governments' behalf, but there is no formal relationship that obliges local authorities to cover the debt. Because most think it is unlikely that Beijing would let major banks go bust, dealing with the debt problem now in the most orderly way possible is the prudent course of action. But even still, the journal cites consultancy firm McKinsey, who estimates in the next 5 years, Chinese banks will require about $320 billion in additional capital, including from bonds, hybrid securities, and selling more shares. You're watching Biz Wire on the Blue Ocean Network, China's first and only privately owned English-language broadcast media. Our full episode can be seen on our website, BONTV/biz-wire. In just a moment, we'll continue with more insight into the big picture of China's economy.